Josephus revealed dress as skimpy as they can or flamboyant as they can to get everybody's attention on them. So this has not changed. This is ancient practice. And so it goes on to tell us, immediately his flatterers called out from various directions in language which boded him no good, for they invoked him as a god. Be gracious to us, they cried. Hitherto we've reverenced you as a human being. Henceforth we confess you to be of more than mortal nature, rather a god. He did not rebuke them, nor did he repudiate their impious flattery. Josephus, as quoted by Dr. Bruce in his commentary, page 241. And so he captivated them with his garments, with the rays of the sun brilliant, appalled with silver threads. And then he stood up to speak. So some suggest the point of the parable was to capitalize on the sun, present himself as a manifestation of the sun god, Theos Epiphanes, as Phoenician rulers had done in earlier days. So they were Phoenician, and if there truly was a worship of a sun god, this would captivate them, no doubt. And again, they were pagans. They weren't believers. They were not Jews. They were pagans in the fullest sense. According to our scriptures, the response of the people were to Agrippa's oration. According to Josephus, it was partly because of his garment, which I perfectly believe that's true. Our scriptures hinge upon an oration that captivated the people. And so a good wordsmith can be a good speaker. So the word for rostrum is the Greek word bema, from which we get the name for this podium. We call this the bema. We call the piece over here, we put the Torah scroll on a bema. Simply a name, a podium, for a place from which a speaker spoke. And typically a bema refers to an elevated platform. So we're renting this building. It's not ours, so we're renting this portion of this big building here, and so we just have level ground. But anytime you find a synagogue, anytime you find a stake-built church to be a church, you're almost always going to find a raised platform. You're going to find at least 3 steps going up to where the podium is from which the man speaks. And the whole point of that comes all the way back from Ezra and Nehemiah, when they were going back to build that second temple, and they began to study the Torah once again after the Babylonian exile. And they built a platform so that and they could see the book being opened. So when the book was open, they stood for the reading. And that has come across today in most churches. We always did it in any church I pastored, as long as we had a podium of that nature, a bema 3 steps high. And so this was an arrangement that's been carried on today in almost all synagogues that are actually built, not just a rented place like we have. And all churches that are built for that purpose. You always have 3 steps going up, a bema. And so this goes all the way back again to Ezra and Nehemiah. And the point was for everybody to be able to see and hear better than on this level that we have here. And it does make a big difference. So an elevated platform, and we simply refer to the little desk here or the place for the scroll as a bema. So public speaking in those days was an accomplished art. I should do a better job myself. I've had better training than the way I always speak. But an accomplished art was some trained in giving entertaining delivery, unique rhythm of speaking, and evoking the emotions of those spoken to. And so rhythmic reading, a good speaker, or someone who sings songs. There's a lot of different ways people can get your attention. And so some of the essential elements of ancient rhetoric, and Agrippa had ample training in rhetoric. Emphasizing certain words, holding out the pronunciation, the use of alliteration, a theatric presentation were essential to hold an audience both then and now. So lifting up the voice higher or bringing it down softer at certain points in time to keep people attentive to what you're trying to say to them. And so heightening certain words, speaking in a certain way. And he was very good at what he did. And so the people kept crying out the voice of a God and not of a man. So our text emphasizes voice. Josephus emphasized dress. That's silver. And boy, it's amazing the different kinds of accoutrements to the dress that some of our stars wear today. Of gold and silver and dangly and all kinds of things to sparkle and make people look. And so this was what was going on. So voice and dress. There are certain voices that lend themselves to public speaking. So certain times deep bass voices command attention. Having a sound that commands attention easily projects to a large audience. To project the voice is a important trait, so that if you don't have these devices, and so the people up on the hillside, and he was down by the water, it naturally reverberated off the water up to the hillside, and they could hear him easily. When they build an amphitheater in the round, and you put somebody down on that bema down there is raised up off the ground a little bit, but you have this natural amphitheater in a half circle, that noise just gradually goes up. And if it's constructed right, and we entertained this while we were at Caesarea at the theater that's been restored there. And right before we were there with Rabbi Ben and a group from down in Florida who sang for us. There was a group from Jerry Falwell's Institute at that point. And so they were down there with all these big amplifiers and all these big speakers. It was unnecessary. And so we had a young lady with us, just a little bitty boom box. And you could hear her clear as a bell up on the top step. And so they would take advantage of these things. And then they would use their voices in very unique ways to gather attention. And so the elements that we miss today, we overcompensate by our speakers and our microphones. But in those days, they could really make it so beautiful and so articulate. And I'm not as articulate as I should be, but boy, some of those guys are such great speakers. And so I think of somebody like James Earl Jones, boy, when that man speaks, that big old deep bass voice of his, everybody stops. So Agrippa received this acclamation of deity, and he did not deter it in any way. Rather, it lifted his ego up. And he got hold of his pride, and he took that to himself. And so our next scriptures make this quite clear. Agrippa's mortality is quickly revealed as he considers himself divine. And God says, no, you are not. So Peter had rejected worship, and Agrippa accepted worship. And so Peter was struck on his side to wake him up to be set free, and Agrippa's going to be struck by an angel of God in order to kill him. And so there's a contrast and comparison through our study. So in Acts 3:11 through 13, there was the man that was healed as Peter and John was going up into the temple about the 9th hour, the time of the morning prayers. And so this guy that they healed rose him up. He was lame, unable to walk. And he was clinging to Peter and John, and all the people ran together to them at the so-called portico of Solomon, full of amazement. When Peter saw this, he replied to the people, men of Israel, why are you amazed at this? Or why do you gaze at us, as if by our own power or piety we had made him walk? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of our fathers, has glorified his servant Yeshua, the one whom you delivered and disowned in the presence of Pilate when you decided to release him. This is the one. By faith in this one, this is how this man has rose up and walking and made well. In Acts 10:25 through 26, when Peter entered after being called by the angel to go with Cornelius's entourage to Cornelius, and he met Cornelius. Cornelius fell at his feet and worshipped him, and Peter raised him up, saying, stand up, I too am just a man. Take not the glory to ourselves. And so what you constantly almost impossible, but they're just men. And the blessings of God upon them and the power of God with them to do miracles through them. So at Lystra, a man was sitting who had no strength in his feet, lame from his mother's womb, who had never walked. This man was listening to Paul as he spoke, who, when he had fixed his gaze on him and had seen that he had faith to be made well, said with a loud voice, stand upright on your feet. And he leaped up and began to walk. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they raised their voice, saying in Lycaonian language, the gods have become like men, have come down to us. And they began calling Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates and wanted to offer sacrifices with the crowds. But when the apostles, Barnabas, Satan didn't have that power. Not really. And so it was a temptation, but he wanted to worship. He wanted to worship. And I personally believe that when we get to Ezekiel chapter 28 with the king of Tyre, when we really read that whole depiction, description, it's no longer the king of Tyre that he's talking about. He's talking about Satan. Satan, description I've heard of Satan. And I know a lot of good exegetes will say that I'm misunderstanding the word of God, but I believe with all my heart that what they're talking about here is that he was the anointed cherub that covered. He was in charge of the earth, so to speak, to take the glory of all this earth God created and give it to the Lord. And he wanted it for himself. And that's hard. That's a very difficult temptation to battle against. Because God gets the glory. We don't get the glory. We must always give the glory to him. So Agrippa's following Satan's model of seeking God-like praise and adoration. There's a contrast drawn in the greater context of a humble Peter who escapes death at Agrippa's hands and Herod Agrippa who dies at God's hand. And so there's the real power and authority that keeps coming out again and again. Verse 23 says, and immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. End of story. Very quick, terse, right to the point. Is it wrong? No, it's not wrong. It's just very condensed. Our text describes the immediate judgment of God because he did not give God the glory. And the angel who rescued Peter struck him on the side to waken him and lead him to freedom. Here the angel of the Lord struck Agrippa to kill. And he was eaten by worms and he died. These are the only two verses of the apostolic writings where an angel strikes someone, an individual. Now, we'll find plenty of times the angel strikes in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. God will take note and take action against those who seek to lift up themselves and be equal to God. You can just write that down on the wall. It's going to be true. So whether it's Belshazzar in the story of Daniel, who got all the golden goblets and silver goblets out that had come from Jerusalem and began to worship themselves, and they had the writing on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. You've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. You're going to die tonight. You just don't take that to yourself. Don't make yourself equal to God. That was true of the Pharaoh of the Exodus, and Antiochus Epiphanes of the Greek period, from which we get our Mac said, I whom you call a God am commanded presently to depart this life. While providence thus reproves the lying words you just now said to me, and I, who was by you called immortal, am immediately to be hurried away by death. But I am bound to accept of what providence allots it as pleases God. For we have by no means lived ill, but in a splendid and happy manner. When he said this, his pain was become violent. Accordingly, he was